And there we are, folks. It is Thursday evening. Good to see you. Good to be together. Hope you've had a fantastic day. Welcome to Bishop and the Rabbi. And this is the meeting place for this amazing conversation that is 2,000 years in the making. For 2,000 years, the followers of Jesus and the relatives of Jesus have not been in conversation, have not been in friendship. And in this generation, the followers of Jesus, who came to be known as the Christians, by the way, the first followers of Jesus all were Jews, but the followers of Jesus who have come to be known as Christians and the Jewish community, the relatives, the biological family of Jesus, are in conversation, are in dialogue, and thank God we are in friendship as the Christian community that far too often in the past has been horrifically, tragically an enemy to the Jewish people. This new breed of Bible-based Christianity, some call it evangelical Christianity. I like to call it Jerusalem-centered Christianity, a Christianity that understands that if we're going to have faith in Jesus, then we should also understand the faith of Jesus and what it means to walk as being faithful to his understanding of the Word of God and his understanding of his relationship with his Father. Come on in, sign in, give us your name, tell us where you're watching from. Hit the share button, hit the like button. That always helps us and helps us spread the word. Tonight is a really special night because one of our absolute all-time favorite rabbis is here, and I'm going to introduce her in just a moment. But as you're signing in, please go ahead and welcome one another. If it is your first or second time, do us a favor and let us know that you are visiting or that you've found us. We have had the past several weeks record attendance almost every week. Torah Tuesdays the other week, which is our other weekly show that we do. We broke all records, and folks from literally, we had people signing in from Alaska. I thought, how are they hearing about us in Alaska? But there they were. And it's because this message of Jerusalem-based Christianity is growing in our time. Christians are finding that deeper sense of rootedness and connectedness to the land of the Bible, the state of Israel, and to the people of the Bible, the Jewish people. Well, someone who we're thrilled to welcome today is no stranger to us because we hear from her husband every single week. And that is, of course, Mark Gerson, who we study with on Tuesdays in Torah Tuesdays. Such an incredible blessing. But all of you know that Mark goes by the moniker, the rabbi's husband. Well, lo and behold, we have with us tonight the rabbi herself. Rabbi Erica Gerson graduated from Amherst College, magna cum laude, and received rabbinic ordination and a master's in religious education from Hebrew Union College. She has been a member of the Board of Trustees of Rodef Shalom School. She's a member of the board of United Hatzalah. And of course, we're always telling you about the incredible work of United Hatzalah, along with the work of African Mission Healthcare, two other organizations and ministries that are dear and near to Rabbi and Mark's hearts and have become so important to us as well. Beyond all that, she is the mother of 4 amazing children, incredible kids. My kids love her kids. Anytime we get an opportunity to be together, they just have a blast. Each of her children are super unique, brilliant, bright in their own way, and it is a joy to see Erica nurture them, mentor them, mother them, and they are incredible parents in addition to all that they do. And Rabbi Erica has been a favorite of ours ever since she preached at the Tabernacle. Gosh, it was pre-COVID, so it's got to be 3.5 years ago. Way overdue for her to come back on up to Buffalo, hopefully sometime soon. Would you give a warm Bishop and the Rabbi welcome to our dear friend, Rabbi Erica Gerson? And there you are.
Thank you.
How are you, Erica?
A big, beautiful, warm introduction. Thank you so much, Bishop. It's always an honor and a joy to be with you and this beautiful community.
Well, it's a well-deserved introduction. I mean, you and Mark and your whole family, you guys really you live your life on purpose. You live your life with intention. And you see that from the social media things that you post. I've seen that from just, every little bit. And it's such an example, to all of us. Before we start, I have to ask, tell us about the backdrop there. I know a little bit about it, but I think that tell folks what that says if they can't see it, and then where
Yeah,
it is in your.
it's a neon sign. So we had a big
Right.
wall in our dining room, and we weren't sure how to fill it. And I don't know, we got this idea to put up something in neon, and my son and I were thinking of what to put. So we settled on this one that says, "Man does not live by bread alone," which first of all is kind of a great pun in a dining room, but we also picked it because it had a deeper meaning, and I think people misunderstand it and sometimes think that that you don't live just by food, but you need art and culture and all of that. But what in the context in the Torah, what it's really saying is that we live by the grace of God. That it's, yes, we have the physical things that sustain us, but all of this is through the grace of God. So that's kind of a fun wink in our dining room, that we need bread, but we also need other things.
And I don't know if you're aware of this, but that phrase has very, very special meaning for Christians, because that phrase played a huge role in the life of Jesus. When Jesus was beginning his ministry, the Bible says he went out into the wilderness and he faced this series of temptations where in the Christian Bible, it says Satan came to tempt him. I think in Jewish understanding, it would be the the evil inclination.
The evil inclination, the Yetzer.
Yeah, what is that in Hebrew?
Yetzer. Yeah. Excuse me, Yetzer. Yeah, there's the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer.
Right. So Jesus is being tempted, and he's gone through this long fast. He's been on a spiritual fast, and the Satan, the evil inclination, comes and says, "Take up these stones and turn them into bread if you have so much power." And Jesus answers him with a quote that's on your wall. Oh. Jesus says, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by the words of God, or the grace of God, as you say. So it's a very, very, and this was the introduction to Jesus' whole ministry. So it's that, see, you prophetically knew that when you chose that you'd end up dealing with Christians, because that verse works perfect.
Well, it's it's what you just said, that truly understanding Jesus requires you to look at what is he preaching? Where did he get that? It doesn't just say it in the sky; it says it in the Torah.
Which is what he said. He said, he says, "As it is written," is how Jesus quotes, and Jesus quotes that. Before we dive into the parsha today, I don't think we've asked you this before, and I like to ask this of rabbis who come on. And I if we've done this, we're overdue to do it again, because I don't remember. But tell us a little bit about your journey towards deciding to pursue, your studies as a rabbi. I mean, you're not currently in a synagogue. You're not in that role right now. Your synagogue is your 4 kids right now.
Right.
They are your congregation. But I'm trying to imagine you're in high school. You could study anything, and ladies are, your friends are picking this, fashion or accounting or whatever. And you start to feel this thing of, I want to study to be a rabbi. I mean, that is like a remarkable thing. Walk us through the journey, the thought process of what led you to that.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And I think it really speaks to the importance of surrounding yourself with people that you want to emulate. So I don't know if you knew this. My journey did begin in high school, or even maybe junior high school. And
all I remember is that you were very involved. You were very involved in something that Christians don't know much about, but I know that the Jewish camp experience was a big part of your background.
I went to a YMCA camp, but I also did have Jewish sort of camping experiences. So you're right. I did do a trip to Israel when I was in 10th grade with a group called Young Judea, which is a wonderful organization, a Zionist organization that really, I think, was a big part of kickstarting my extraordinarily strong passion for Israel. So, but what happened was that in my Hebrew school program, so that's like after school Jewish identity. It begins with preparation for your bar and bat mitzvah and continues if you're still interested. So I had really wonderful teachers, many of whom were rabbinical students here in New York City. I grew up in New York City. And so they were able to staff our programs for teenagers with people who were eventually going into the rabbinate themselves. And I say it's kind of like being a lawyer is actually an unusual job. Any of these jobs are unusual. And very often we find ourselves pursuing some of the jobs that we see in our youth from adults that we know, right? I probably don't know anyone that's going to be a plumber because none of my friends' parents were plumbers. It's a great profession, but we didn't grow up thinking about it. There are a million and one great jobs that I could say that my friends are probably never going to be because they had no role models in those areas. But I was really lucky. So I knew all of these young, interesting, dynamic people who wanted to be rabbis. I was always drawn to studying Jewish topics. And I can only say that in the same way that some people just love math class or science. It's just, we're all just sort of wired differently. So I had that. I was interested in teaching. I was interested in learning. I was interested in psychology and therapy, in making a difference in the world, and all these pieces. So I thought about being a lawyer. I thought about being a social worker or a psychologist, and all these different pieces. And then I said, well, wait a minute, this one profession of rabbi is so dynamic, and there are so many things you can do with it. And I can check all those boxes and really make a difference in the world. And so very early on, by 10th grade, I was pretty clear that that was what I probably wanted to do. And then I continued in that path, taking a few side journeys along the way, but all of which helped prepare me to be a rabbi.
Incredible. And let me ask you this: how you were raised? Were you raised within the Reform tradition or conservative? What were you raised within?
You know, I was raised in a Reform congregation. I don't know how much this parallels the experience of your community, but a lot of it comes down to people don't really study the philosophy and ideology behind each movement and say, okay, that one describes me best, and therefore I'm going to go there. It's my parents both grew up with Judaism. My dad was nothing particularly intense. My mom's family identified as conservative Jews and had I would say, a stronger Jewish identity. Although clearly both parents, it was just all Jewish. But there were kids from my school that were going to Hebrew school at this particular synagogue. They were all walking over, and my mom said, okay, that sounds good. You know, she said all the important decisions in life. It was like they were totally on a whim. So I think in a lot of cases, people choose a congregation based on whether it's a friend, whether it's in the right neighborhood, whether there's a rabbi that you connect with. And you wouldn't accidentally end up in Orthodox if you're non-Orthodox and things like that. But it's really a lot more fluid than it would seem. And so, yes, I grew up Reform, but it doesn't mean that my family studied every element of the Reform platforms and agreed to them.
Sure. And then just one more question on this train of thought, and that is that trip in 10th grade to Israel. You said that was such a definitive, moment in your journey. And because I tell people this all the time, and I challenge Christians, I say, every Christian at least once in their life needs to go and be in the land of the Bible, because it's really indescribable.
Yeah.
The impact that it makes on your soul. I mean, I've had the privilege of literally bringing thousands of people there, and they just all talk about that power. What was it for that trip? What do you remember was the kind of light switch or the moments that just, you're in 10th grade. I mean, you're a teenager, but something happened that imprinted you in that trip.
Yeah, I think it actually began with a teacher named Ellie. I wish I knew his last name. I was thinking recently of trying to figure out how to work backwards and find out who this man was. He taught my 6th grade class, which was where we studied the Holocaust as well as Israel. And he was such a phenomenal teacher and had such a deep love. And I think that often also happens with Israel, that when you catch that love, that it's something that you can share, and it's really a gift that you can give to someone else. So I think he really planted a seed there. But by 10th grade, I actually went on 2 trips to Israel. The first, I had already signed up for Young Judea, but the first was the March of the Living. I don't know if you're familiar with that. So that is a program that's a program where you go first to Poland, and you learn about life before the war, which was really such a rich Jewish life happening in Europe. And then you learn about what happened in the Holocaust. You pay tribute to the victims of the Holocaust by going to some of the camps. And then you go over to Israel, and you're in Israel for its Memorial Day and its Independence Day. And that was really a life-changing trip. I mean, it's hard to pinpoint one thing. Like you said, you just have to be there. And there's nothing like an Israeli Memorial Day and nothing like an Israeli Independence Day. It just cannot compare to America. It puts to shame the way that we celebrate our country and our heroes and the people that have died for our values, just in terms of the intensity and the amount of love and connection that each person has. It's really extraordinarily moving. So I did that. Then I did 6 weeks in Israel, touring the country, getting to know it, walking it from top to bottom, hiking it, meeting the people. There is no comparison. It's not, as you know, it's not a trip, it's a journey. And there's nothing like it. And I would encourage people, not only should you go, but try to go as soon as you can, because once you go, you're probably going to go back, and it's really going to change the orientation of your life. So just do it sooner.
It's true. It's true. It's absolutely wonderfully true. And perfect time for a plug. We're going there September the 27th. Go to awakejerusalem.com. We already have, I think, 30 people who have signed up already. So you can join me in Israel September 27th to October 9th for our annual fall pilgrimage there, the day of prayer for the peace of Jerusalem, and the Awake Jerusalem tour. Go to awakejerusalem.com and sign up. All right, Rabbi, let's dive into the Bible. We are in Leviticus chapter 26, everybody. Leviticus 26. And we start with verse 3. And I asked you before we went on air, Rabbi, let's see how I do. We are in Bechukotai. How's that?
You nailed it.
All right.
You got it.
Very good. Bechukotai is our parsha. It is a mouthful. It's a shorter parsha, interestingly. Sometimes the parshot are quite lengthy. This one is really just about a chapter and a half. Leviticus 26:3 through 27 and verse 34. So we're here, and Moses is continuing, the dialogue with the children of Israel. We've just come through a lot of the descriptions of the Shabbat year, the Shemitah year, which, by the way, is this year in Israel. It's a Shemitah year in Israel right now, the year of Jubilee. The Hayovel, we're talking about that in chapter 26 or 25, and we come into 26. So Bechukotai, Rabbi, take us into it. What does it mean? What's it about? What does it teach us? And how does it have anything to do with us today?
That's a great question. But I wanted to tell you a little bit. I want to take us back a step and walk you through my process. And hopefully this will be helpful to people as you think about engaging in study on your own. It's awesome. I love the way that you facilitate it for everyone, Bishop, and make it so easy. You just tune in and it's not intimidating. But people should also know that you can do this on your own. And if you're ever asked, I don't know, in your community, in our community, there's a tradition when we are meeting for anything in our Jewish institutions, we try to have a little bit of a Devar Torah, some words of Torah. So if someone asked you to give some words of Torah in the Jewish community, you would always look at what we're doing now, which is what is the Parsha? Where are we in the calendar? So the first thing I always do is I go, and I have no financial stake in this website, but I recommend hebcal.com. I don't know if you've been there before. Heb as in Hebrew, cal as in calendar.com. And it's a great resource to anchor yourself in where you are on the Jewish calendar. If you want to figure out what Parsha might be coming up for a special event in your life, for a birthday, if you're going to talk about something, or you want to see where a Jewish holiday falls, or just anything else. If you're going to invite a bunch of Jews over and want to make sure it's not a fast day, you can you can always check hebcal.com. So,
and is that one E or two E's?
HEB, like Hebrew.
Okay, HEB, right?
Yeah,
no, I think I know. I know that. I know how to spell Hebrew.
No, you're right. There's Heb, that's HEB, which is like a cool Heb thing, like the Hebs. Okay, so so I'll give you. We don't have to go there together. I'll just tell you sort of where we are. So a few things that strike me with where we are in the calendar. We are we're coming up on Shabbat, which is why we have this parsha leading. So the parsha is assigned for the whole week. So we're at the end of the book of Leviticus, and we also, this is called, if you looked at Hebcal, you would see it says Shabbat Mevarchim. So you might hear the word Mivarech it sounds like Baruch a little bit. The bet and the vet are interchangeable. So it's a Shabbat of blessing. What that means is that we're coming up on a new month. So when we have a new month coming in the coming week, we announce it on Shabbat. We don't have time to go into all of it, but it's actually one of my favorite blessings. I think I might have shared it on here with your community before when I've spoken to you.
The Rosh Chodesh, right? The
Yes,
Rosh Chodesh, the new
blessing.
month, which we learned from your husband was the very first commandment that God gave to the Jewish people as a whole. The totality of the Jewish people, the first commandment was to honor the Rosh Chodesh, the new month. If we have that right, that's what he taught us.
I'm not going to contradict my husband. That sounds good to me.
Okay.
Not in this case anyway. Okay. So, right. So we have a month. So we have Shabbat Mevarchim. We're going to be coming into the month of Sivan. That's the third month. We're also, we're counting the Omer leading from Passover to Shavuot. So we're not going to go into that much right now, but I think just in case there's people who don't know what that is, it's a ritual counting where we're moving from Passover and getting out of Egypt until God is going to give us the Torah at Mount Sinai. And counting is one of the ways that we show our enthusiasm to get there. That's the rabbinic take on it. By the way, the Torah take, you might say, gee, I'm not really catching on here, because oftentimes there was a Torah level, which was much more agricultural. And then there was a rabbinic level, which is more about looking at the Torah as something that we inherited. So in the Bible, and if we're reading the Torah, we're counting the Omer, we're really focusing on the agricultural aspect that we're about to move into a new harvest time. But that's all happening. And then the one that I wanted to draw our attention to that really caught my eye is that we have Yom Yerushalayim coming up. So that means Yerushalayim is Jerusalem. We have Jerusalem Day coming up. It hits on sundown on Saturday, the 28th. So we spoke a little bit off camera, but I think it would be great to tell everybody, because I said, oh, Bishop, I don't know if your community has any familiarity with this day, but in fact you do. So do you want to mention that for a minute?
Sure, absolutely. Well, for those who've been with Eagle Swings for a long time and they remember our very first foray into the office of the Consul General in New York, this is going way, way back to the early 2000s, where they said, you know what? They said, we've never had any kind of outreach with the evangelical pastors in New York City. And so Erwin Hochberg of blessed memory reached out to us. There was a wonderful lady named Cheryl Rivera who helped. And then, of course, David Nekrutman was the one who was really on the ground making it happen. And we went in and did one of the very first joint services, joint, kind of programs. The first one was earlier than Yom Yerushalayim, but it was so successful that the Consul General said, this was awesome. Could we do this again? And I'm thinking he means, could we do it again next year? I think this was in like February or March. And I said, sure, we'll do it again, thinking it's a year. He said, no, I want to do it in 2 months. And so we did it right around Yom Yerushalayim. And for those who aren't familiar, Yom Yerushalayim celebrates the reunification of the city of Jerusalem in 1967. Jerusalem had been divided right through the heart of the city. Very similar, those of you who remember the Berlin Wall. And there was the wall that went right through the heart of Berlin. Jordan owned the majority of biblical Jerusalem. You'd say Old City Jerusalem. And New City Jerusalem was within the state of Israel. And there was a constant volley of gunshots and fire attacking the Jewish people. And in 1967, God reunified the city. And so Yom Yerushalayim celebrates that Jerusalem is back within Israeli hands. Do I have that correct, Rabbi?
You absolutely do. And I think it's extraordinary, because what we're going to get into right now in the Parsha is about the experience of being in the land and the experience of being out of the land, banished from the land, and then the hope that one day we would come back to the land. And so to have that Parsha now tied forever to this historic day, which the rabbis actually said is going to be a new minor holiday, is pretty extraordinary to see that next chapter in history. And I think to understand what that can mean spiritually for us to see that happening is pretty incredible. I want to read something that that's often read at Yom Yerushalayim that I think will be new to your community and hopefully powerful. So this is what Defense Minister Moshe Dayan said when Israel had recaptured and reunited the old city of Jerusalem. They said, this morning, the Israel Defense Forces liberated Jerusalem. We have united Jerusalem, the divided capital of Israel. We have returned to the holiest of our holy places, never to part from it again. To our Arab neighbors, we extend also at this hour, and with added emphasis at this hour, our hand in peace. And to our Christian and Muslim fellow citizens, we solemnly promise full religious freedom and rights. We did not come to Jerusalem for the sake of other people's holy places and not to interfere with the adherents of other faiths, but in order to safeguard it in order to safeguard its entirety and to live there together with others in unity.
That is profound. That is profound. Yeah. And I think something that needs to be more widely distributed, because it so powerfully captures not only the historic heart of, Dayan and the other founders, the early Zionists, but it captures the heart of Israel today.
That's right.
And this mischaracterization that Israel is some colonizing, imperialistic, expansionistic force is just such absolute, balderdash. And to have that kind of a commentary is very, very powerful. You've talked about the land, and I just want to reflect on that for a moment. It really is, you think of the Jewish people at Sinai, which again, we're in the midst of counting the Omer. We're going to come to the Sinai moment soon. Really, God gave the Jewish people these two things. He gave them the land and he gave them a book. And this sense of Jewish connection to the land and how the land itself, it's hard to describe, but the land is like a living barometer of the connection between the Jewish people and God. God says, if you're in sin, if you're hard-hearted, if you turn away from me, the judgment is that the land is not going to produce. It's not going to produce its fruit. You're going to have difficulty. But when you're walking in harmony with me, when you're walking in my purpose, the land itself is going to, blossom as a rose. And I think that is especially connected to this Parsha, because we get into this thing of the blessings and the curses. So this issue of the Jewish people's connection to the land and the land's connection to God is so important.
Yeah, I think you said it very well. It's like a barometer of that relationship. So let's get into it. So you kicked us off already. So bechukotai is a mouthful. It really, when you try to translate it, you kind of need the next word for it to make sense. So in my laws is what that word means, but it's im bechukotai telechu. And you said it, when you walk in my ways. So telechu is the word that has this lech, which is walking. It's also, and I think we've talked about this before, halacha, which is a word that y'all might know, is Jewish law. It all has the root of walking. So to be in a religious way of being is not staying and standing. It's about movement. It's about walking. So if you, and maybe that's where we got the English. I don't even know. If you walk in my ways, that is literally what the Hebrew is telling us, that it's about walking with God, walking in God's path and in the way that God wants us to move through the world. So this Parsha is known colloquially as the blessings and the curses. There's also a tradition, if you ever hear this read in synagogue, the tradition is there are a few parts where we read them in special ways, and this is one of them. So you read this in kind of a hushed voice when you get to the curses. The curses are really awful, and in order to show that we wouldn't even want to speak it, kind of like Voldemort, you do it in a very hushed tone. So that's the tradition about how we chant it. As you said, the whole thing is relatively brief, and the blessings are a lot shorter than the curses. And it's hard not to read it all because it's such powerful words, and I encourage people to go back and read all of the original. But for the sake of moving, I'll just take us a little bit through it. So it says, I'm just going to pull it up here. If you follow my laws and faithfully observe my commandments, I will grant you rain in their season so that the earth shall yield its produce. And it goes on, and it talks about basically what you said, Bishop, that the land will flourish and it will be easy. It says you shall give chase to your enemies, and they shall fall before you by the sword. 5 of you shall give chase to 100, and 100 of you shall give chase to tens of thousands. Your enemy shall fall before you by the sword. So already you can see now, we're reading this, we're thinking about Yom Yerushalayim, we're thinking about the incredible, truly miraculous victory over overwhelming numbers of
Right.
foreign forces, it's hard not to feel these words jumping off the page. And so if it says, if you're walking in my ways, I will do all these things. I will look with you. And I'm sort of bouncing through all the verses here. I will look with favor upon you and make you fertile and multiply you. And I know my husband likes to talk about that a lot, that blessings is increase always. And I will maintain my covenant with you. You shall eat old grain long stored. You shall have to clear it out to make room for the new. There will just be so much abundance. But here I think is now where we get to the key of it, which is, I will establish my abode in your midst, and I will not spurn you. I will be ever present in your midst. I will be your God, and you shall be my people. I, the Lord, am your God, who brought you out from the land of Egypt to be their slaves no more, who broke the bars of your yoke and made you walk erect. It's beautiful. It's
And that
poetic.
was, that's verse 11 through 14 there that you just were in.
Yeah, through 13. It finishes up. So we only get up to verse 13 with blessings. And then there is a very long, and I'm not going to read them all. They're really awful, awful curses. And it basically, it reverses everything. So it says, if you're going to be obstinate, if you're not going to walk in my ways, then I'm going to start punishing you. And if you continue not to walk in my ways, I'm going to punish you more. And if you continue, even after all those punishments, I'm going to kick you out of the land. I'm going to kick you out of the land. And we'll go a little bit more into the detail on some of those, in a moment. So, but let's take a step back. So we have this parsha. It's telling us that there are blessings and curses. So what are some things we can already learn from this? Number one, there's free will. That's key. So a lot of people struggle with concepts of God and trying to understand, well, if there's this omnipotent God, what does that mean for me? Do I have choices in this world? Is everything preordained? Why are there bad things in the world if there's a loving God?
Right.
There's still problems. There's still always the question of theodicy that we can't answer. Why do people suffer when they shouldn't? But part of what this parsha is saying is there is free will, and there will be consequences for the choices that you make. And so it says there's going to be free will, and there's going to be reward and punishment. Now, what's really interesting here, one of my favorite people to go to, and I know the rabbi's husband as well loves him, is Rabbi Sachs, Lord Jonathan Sachs.
Sure.
And so I always look to him, and he elevates some of the most important points right away. And he was saying, and it's obvious once he says it, what are the rewards and punishments? They're in this world. So it's very important that we realize rewards and punishments are about how your day and your life will be impacted now. This is the Jewish way is not, if you live a good life, you're going to get to go to heaven. If you live a bad life, one day you're going to be punished and go to hell. This is about if you are living in God's ways, you will have the things, and we'll go back and look in a little more detail what it's saying, but you'll have these blessings. And if you're not living now in God's ways, then your life now in the here and now is going to have painful ramifications from God for those choices. So there's free will in the world. We have to focus on this world and not the next world. And then there's another piece in here that's really interesting, because as we said, the ultimate punishment, at least in the Jewish eyes, the ultimate punishment is that you'll be banished and you won't feel close to God. And that is a collective experience. It doesn't say like you, Bishop Robert, are going to get thrown out of the land. It's your whole people. And it's an interesting point. You might like it, you might not like it, but that's the way that the Torah is telling us it works, that to some degree, even though you can't control your neighbor, we're all going to be in this together. And either as a society, we will rise, or as a society, we will fail. I think that feels very real to history and to life, and certainly for the history of the Jewish people. We as a Jewish people, by and large, our fortunes rise and fall together as a people. And maybe that's part of why we still care when we meet a Jew in England or in France or wherever we go. We feel that sense of kinship, that we're in this together. So those are the first things.
And let me just to say that it is so profound, the sense of connection is not the right word. I'll use the word connection until a better one comes to me. But
maybe shared destiny.
Yeah, that Jewish people really have together. I remember some of my earliest conversations with your husband. He at the persecution of Christians, the martyrdom of Christians, was very much in the news cycle in Africa and Sudan and different places. And Mark looked at me and he said, I never can understand, why don't Christians have this sense of shared, community, this sense of peoplehood.
Yeah.
And it's true. And we I guess we have it in an abstract way. We have it in some kind of, on paper it's there, but it's so tremendously different. Going back for a little bit to where you talked about how Independence Day and et cetera is celebrated in Israel. At that, and I didn't say anything then, but I'll say it now. Another thing that's always struck me, when you're in Israel and God forbid an Israeli soldier is captured, or an Israeli soldier is wounded, or God forbid killed, instantly on the news in Israel, that soldier's name. They're talking to his family. The rabbi that you instantly are brought into the family of that soldier. And I thought, so many times in America, we'll get a news blurb, 4 Marines were killed, and there's no personalization of it. It is totally opposite in Israeli culture. It is personalized in this very, very beautiful and humane and familial way. And so what you're saying in that there's the communal, when God says, verse 11, I will put my dwelling place among you. It's that plural you, God saying, I'm going to dwell with you as a people. And so what you're saying is that sense of collectivity, that sense of family, it causes you to view everything in such a different manner. And that's one of the ways that I think we, as the Christian community, are made better by the example of the Jewish people. There's things that Christians do wonderfully and that are fantastic, but we need to grow in our sense of communal obligation one for another.
Yeah, it is pretty extraordinary, and I really can't overstate it. The feeling of connection. Why do we care if the next Nobel Prize winner is a Jew? I don't know. We feel pride in it, why? And let me tell you, every time there's a terrible story in the news and we think, oh, please don't let them be Jewish, and there's a shared shame. We rise and fall together. Even though we had nothing to do with whomever these people are, but the pride comes and the disappointment also comes. It's really, I think it's a very concrete blessing that you feel being Jewish, to have that sense of family, to know that I went when I was in Israel. It was very easy to travel other places, so I went to several places. It was a lot of fun, and I spent part of Sukkot in Marrakesh, and I knew that I could connect to the Jewish community and someone would welcome me, and they did. And we ended up in a sukkah with Jews from Paris and England and Marrakesh, and from Israel and New York. And it's just hard to describe that there's that enthusiasm and excitement as soon as you find someone else who's Jewish, that you feel a shared connection. Sadly, on the topic of soldiers, it is such a small country that you actually really do know all these people, that it's always 1 or 2 degrees of separation. They went to your high school, they served in a unit with someone, your cousin, your father went to the army with them. It's just, it's extremely painful. It's not abstract at all. And all of these people, and it's very, very painful. But you're right, that the importance of lifting up the name and the story I don't know if you know this, on the Memorial Day in Israel, the TV stations are taken over and they have special programming, and there are stations where you just see every single name, that every name gets a turn to be scrolled through. It's pretty powerful.
Yeah. Naming is such a very important thing within Hebrew tradition, Jewish tradition, the power of the name, and on the annual yard site, commemorating someone's passing, right? Their name is spoken out. That thing of their name enduring and it's beautiful. It's a powerful thing.
And that's also, oh, sorry, I was gonna say, just in Ashkenazi Jewish circles, that's why we take very seriously naming after the dead, that it's another way to bring that name back.
Yeah. Why do you think the curses are more numerous than the blessings? Why you want to comment on that?
Yeah. So I think what's really interesting about it, if we went through it, you go through a paragraph and God gives a bunch of curses, and then it says, and if you don't obey me, oh no, sorry, this is the beginning. Okay. So then it says, and here's verse 18 as an example, it says, and if for all that you do not obey me, I'll go on.
Right.
I'll go on. I'll just go on to discipline you sevenfold. And it says, and then verse 21, and if you remain hostile to me and refuse to obey me. So it's not that God is dumping and saying, I'm a really vengeful God. It's actually, I think, a really compassionate God, because it's a series of,
Wow.
and I think we know that
That's
as a
beautiful.
parent, right? It's
Yep.
like, if you mess up, this is the first thing. And then it's like, okay, if you mess up again, I'm going to make it even worse. Okay, you're still not doing the right thing. I'm going to have to go deeper. And it's really, God does not want to punish. God wants us to get this right. God doesn't want to keep us out of the land. God doesn't want to be far from us. And there's something really interesting that all the commentators pick up on. There's a verb in here that is not reused anywhere else. So one of the ways that we look for meaning in when we're reading Torah or Bible is repetition of words. If you see a word multiple times in a story, that gives you a clue that that's an important part of that story. We actually had a great exercise we used to do when I was in rabbinical school with highlighters, and you can do it in English, although you might miss some of it, but certainly if you have the Hebrew, but probably in the English it would work anyway. And we just highlight certain words, and then you start to see, oh my gosh, wait, this word came out like 7, 11, 24 times. So there's this mysterious word because it's not anywhere else, and it says carry. If you relate to me with this something, and the different commentators try to understand what exactly is it that God is not happy that we're doing, and some of them say it might relate to it's rebelliousness, obstinacy, indifference, hard-heartedness, and reluctance. There's also some that say maybe it's related to cold, because there's a car is cold. So
where is it, Rabbi? Where is it in the text?
I didn't mark the individual times, but they keep retranslating. You wouldn't catch it in English because they had to come up with translations of it. Gotcha. So it's basically saying if you act with carry toward me, it's a negative thing.
Got it.
So. And what God is saying is, if this is a covenant, and so, and I don't know if this may not be exactly how you all think about the way that God's emotions are toward us, but in this parsha, it's pretty clear that if you are good to me, I will be good to you. If you are loving and warm toward me, I will also turn toward you. But if you're going to continuously turn your heart or treat this as there's one of the other commentary says it's like a very casual, like whatever, like, yeah, okay, I'll try to be in God's ways. If you're going to do that, then that's what you're going to get from God. And I kind of had to laugh. It reminds me of, I won't name my child. You said I have 4 very different children. There's one in particular, and maybe 2 of them, to which I'm often saying, the energy that you give out is the energy you're going to get back. Like and it's just the natural way of humans, right?
Sure.
And you're a wonderful father, but I'm sure that when your kids come at you with a snappy tone, it's
Absolutely.
The natural reaction is to mirror that tone. So I feel like, to me, that was part of what this part was saying. If you're going to present that kind of approach to me, to the world, then I'm going to present that to you. That's,
what it is so beautiful. And what a twist that you see the mercy of God expressed through his increasing threats, because he's like saying, I don't want to do this. I don't want to go here. So it's an expression of his mercy, and it ends so beautifully. In verse 40.
I was just turning. We're on the same page. I was over there.
Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, you pick it up. I mean, verse 40, or even better, verse 42.
I was going to go all the way down to 44, but so you go.
Well, verse 42, it says, but I will remember my covenant with Jacob, and my covenant with Isaac, and my covenant with Abraham. And I will remember, here it is, you've been telling us, I will remember the land. So God has this covenant with the land itself.
Right.
For the land will be deserted by them. Yet in spite of this, when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not reject or abhor them. So God is saying, even when it gets super bad, I'm going to remember my covenant, and I'm going to draw you back.
Right. And this is actually, I want to go back for a second. I glanced over, and I should have read to you. This one, I think, is the most chilling of the curses. And I just want to go here so we can see then what God offers to do after. So going back around verse 36, it says, as for those of you who survive, so this is after lots of other terrible curses have already been described. It says, I will cast a faintness into their hearts in the land of the enemies. The sound of a driven leaf shall put them to flight. fleeing as though from sword. They shall fall, though none pursues. With no one pursuing, they shall stumble over one another as before the sword. You shall not be able to stand your ground before your enemies, but shall perish among the nations of the land. It goes on, and it basically saying, you're going to live in such fear and such dread. And it contrasts with the blessing that even when you're blessed, when you're living with a knowledge that God's presence is with you, then whatever the hardship is, you can endure because God is with you. And the curse that God is telling us is that when we turn away, when we treat God when we trivialize God and treat it as sort of a throwaway relationship, or turn ourselves away and don't walk in God's ways, then even in the best of circumstances, you will tremble, you will feel a dread, you will feel alone, you will have no strength. And that idea that you will feel pursued even when you're not being pursued just really resonates with me. And looking at all the people I know who have so many blessings in their life and yet feel a sense of threat, a sense of anxiety, of loneliness, of dread, of depression. And I think what this is saying is that's the worst case scenario. And when God is with you, and when you open yourself up to know that even in the land of your enemies, even in the bad places, if God is with you, then you have the strength. But so that's the worst and the best kind of combined there. And now let's go back to 44, I think it was, where it says,
if I can just comment on what you just
yeah,
said,
go
though,
ahead.
it's almost like, and I don't want to play armchair psychologist here, but it's almost like looking at those, it's almost like comparing Sabras who were born within the reborn state of Israel, served with pride in the IDF. They have that kind of Israeli toughness to them, etc. And comparing them to those whose ancestors, maybe just a generation or two ago, came through the Shoah, came through the Holocaust. There's kind of this group PTSD, right? I mean, it's almost like what's being described here is a PTSD, like you're going to live in such fear.
Yeah.
And yet now those Israelis who are born in this season of blessing, of course, they're aware of the surrounding enemies, but man, they're strong. I mean, they have a sense of strength, a sense of pride, a sense of confidence, I think, in their ability to handle themselves. And so I think it's an incredible warning that we move into individual and group insecurity when we distance ourselves away. So
Yeah.
anyways, go ahead.
Yeah,
Where did you want to take us?
Well, hold on. You got me going somewhere else too. There was a quote from Nietzsche that can be misinterpreted a little bit here, but I was thinking also in terms of where we are in the world and in Jewish history. And it says, one of his most quoted statements is, "The one who has a why to live can bear almost any how." And in other words, if we know that there's a purpose and a task to fulfill, then it somehow gives us the strength to keep moving forward. And I think what we're about to read here with God says, I'm going to get you back in the land. It's going to turn around. And knowing, here we know it because we're reading the Parsha. For Jews of this last century, we know it because we've watched Jewish history. And so there's the pain of the Holocaust, and there's also some terrible philosophical struggles and theological struggles where people say, well, maybe the Holocaust is actually God punishing us for leaving God's ways. Some ultra orthodox, like really not widely accepted, but there were some people who would say, those Jews were killed during the Holocaust because their mezuzahs weren't kosher, or because they were straying and being too modern. Broadly, the Jewish people reject that. Sometimes there's just evil in the world. But nonetheless, seeing that we have risen and come back to the land, and the words of Ezekiel come to mind as really a prophecy that has come to fruition.
Right.
Knowing, even as this generation, we just had Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Remembrance Day, and seeing some of the pictures on social media. If anybody has a purpose, it's these young people in their military uniforms in Israel who have grandparents who came from the Shoah. And did you see some of those powerful images?
Incredible.
That person can endure anything. That person is not going to be afraid when they go in service of their country, even in the worst of circumstances, because they know the why, and they have a purpose, and they have a sense that there is a trajectory here of the Jewish people that calls them to do what they do. And so you could be sitting at home and feeling a dread in a very safe place because you don't have that sense of why and that sense of connection to God. But if you have that sense of connection, you can be in the most dangerous of places. So I want to read the beautiful part. And then I also, before I don't know how much time we have left, but before we wrap up, I want to tell you about something that happened to me this week. Okay, so where I lost my page. You have that blessing page. You want to read that to everybody?
We're in Leviticus chapter 26.
Here we are, 26:44. I got it. Yet even then, when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not reject them or spurn them so as to destroy them. This is God talking to the Jewish people, annulling my covenant with them. For I, the Lord, am their God. I will remember in their favor the covenant with the ancients whom I freed from the land of Egypt in the sight of the nations to be their God. I, the Lord. And then it continues to another part of the parsha. But basically, God is saying that even in the darkest moments, I won't forget, and I will eventually take you back. And trying to look if I brought the Ezekiel quote with me. I don't have it here, but basically, Ezekiel similarly says that there's this prophecy that these dry bones will come back to life.
Oh yeah,
that the people will return to the land, and that. In this time of the calendar, when we're thinking about Yom HaShoah, then Yom Yerushalayim, and all of these pieces coming together, and these prophecies here that one day the Jewish people will be back in the land, that the land will yield its fruits. As you said, literally, when the land is arid versus when the land is green. And when you look at pictures of what the Jewish people have been able to do over the last 100 years of turning barren areas, that's one of the things when you go to Israel, when you go to the border and you see green on one side of the fence and brown on the other. I mean, you just can't replicate that until you go to the land of Israel and see it. And you can't help but think, sure, there was irrigation. Yes, there was planting of forestry, but there's blessing here. There has to be a bigger hand in this. There is blessing in the land. We've drained the swamps. The deserts are blooming. It's just extraordinary to see. And so that really comes to life and brings to life this passage as well as the Ezekiel passage.
Folks, we've had an incredible time talking with our dear friend, Rabbi Erica Gerson. Hit the share button for us. That gets that out there into algorithm land and helps us grow this movement of Jerusalem-centered Christianity. Join me in Jerusalem, September 27th to October the 9th. Go to awakejerusalem.com. We've already got a few dozen people who are all signed up to come. And it's an amazing, amazing conversation. And we've been studying this week in Bechukotai, Leviticus 26 and 27. This is the blessings and the curses that God lays out to the Jewish people. Blessings for obedience, curses for disobedience. And Rabbi has beautifully brought out to us that even God's curses, even the judgments, the negative aspects, have mercy as their motivation. God is saying, I really don't want to do this, so I'm letting you know this so that you're drawn back to me. And in the final analysis, he never cuts off his people, even in the worst of circumstances. He says, for the sake of my covenant, I will remember you. And Rabbi, you said that there's one story you want to tell us before we sign off, and we'll come to that in 1 second. You said something that happened to you.
Yeah.
But before we go there, I just want to say how important that last comment is, because, and I obviously, you know how much I love, esteem, honor, respect, am in awe of, the story of the Jewish people. But it's so important that it says, verse 45, but for their sake, for the sake of the fathers, the ancestors, for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, I, the Lord, will remember my covenant with them. And I tell people all the time, I say, the question of your theology regarding Israel and the Jewish people is not an ethnic question. It's not a racial question. It's not a theological question of the Jewish people being better than any other people on earth. If you don't have an understanding of God's interaction with the Jewish people, you're challenging the character of God himself. God himself says, I am a God who is faithful. I am a God who keeps my promises. I am a God whose covenant endures. And God tells the Jewish people, even though I know you're going to mess up, because of who I am, I'm going to be faithful. And that gives me confidence that on my bad days, God's going to have mercy with me. God's going to have forgiveness with me. When we understand that if God's done with the Jewish people, and I say this to the replacement theology community, if God has cast them off, if God has cut off his covenant with them because, oh, well, they didn't receive Jesus as the Messiah, so God's done with them. Folks, if God can so easily break his promises, how do you know that God's going to be faithful to you? It goes to the character of God himself, because we all mess up. We all disobey. We all have times that we turn away, but God's covenant endures. And that's why it's just so crucial that we understand that your theology regarding Israel, your theology regarding the Jewish people, actually is an indication of your theology about the character of God. What do you believe about the faithfulness and the credibility of God to honor his word and to honor his promises? One day soon, Rabbi Erica is going to teach us a class on Shabbat. We are waiting for this. We're excited about it. Nobody does Shabbat like Rabbi Erica does. I've been there several times. I've had the blessing with my kids being there for Shabbat, and we're looking forward to that. But Rabbi, give us this last story.
No, forget it. I can't do better than that, Bishop. We'll talk later. That was a great ending. That was a great ending.
Sure?
I'm positive. No,
give us a final word. Give us a final word before we sign off.
My final word is that I think this Parsha is calling us to remember that we do have free will, and we need to take that responsibility seriously, and know that this life is the one that counts. And don't spend your time thinking about the future and what may or may not be. Think about today. Am I walking in God's path? Am I walking the way God wants to? Am I turning toward God? If I'm feeling far from God, what can I do? What first step can I take? Because God wants me to be on the right path, and God wants to be in relationship with me. And it's an invitation. And like you said, when there's the negatives and the threats, that's just to get us on the right path, just like a good parent would. And God is really here for us. And this relationship endures, and just know that God is there for you. And I hope that you'll also have the blessing that this Parsha calls out of, getting to be in the land of Israel and experience God's presence there. There's nothing like it.
So good. Thank you so much. You are so busy. You've got 4 kids. You sit on a bunch of boards. You've got 100 things to do, and you spent your time teaching us Gentiles. We are so grateful that you've had this time. Thank you for the invitation.
It's always a pleasure.
It is a joy. Folks, thanks for dropping by on this edition of Bishop and the Rabbi. Tomorrow night, sign in at 6 o'clock. We will do the Shabbat brachot as we do every week at 6. We'll light the candles. We'll break the bread. We'll do the wine. And we pray that you're growing that tradition within your family. The Shabbat made God's top 10 list, so it needs to be on our radar screen. And so join us tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Rabbi, thank you for being with us. And everybody, remember, keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem. Good night, everybody.